They've all done an excellent job. So we're very excited that we have a pediatrician tonight who, Joan is going to do a little prayer and introduction before you come up. And I was calling him Philip, but it's Patrick is what you go by. Is that your middle name? Okay, it's his middle name, so that's great. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Joan, who's going to do the intro for us.
Tonight, the reading is from Mark 10, verse 14. And Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God." Let us pray. Thank you, ever-present and all-knowing God, for your gift of this gathering and your gifts of seeing, hearing, and learning, especially tonight. Amen. Tonight, our program is centered on pediatric sports medicine, specifically sports and concussion, and how to protect your child. We're happy to present, it's going to be presented by Dr. Patrick Mularoni, pediatrician who practices at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital with a specialty in sports medicine. He completed his pediatric residency at St. John's Hospital and Medical Center in Detroit and his pediatric emergency medicine fellowship at Emory University in Atlanta. Dr. Mullen, thank you, is board certified in pediatric emergency medicine, pediatric sports medicine, and general pediatrics. Please welcome the doctor.
Thank you. All right. You did awesome. It was perfect. Perfect. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. So I'm going to be a bit loud. Am I too loud? No? All right. So I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about concussion. And it's a passion of mine. And it's something that I have been working, I've been working in the field for 7 years. So I started out in Detroit, was born and raised in Detroit. The first time I stepped foot in St. Petersburg, I came and visited the Fredericks house in Venetian Isles. My parents were friends with the Fredericks when we swam together at Pine Lake Country Club. And I was here for 2 days. And I didn't know it then, but I do now that I love this place. And I was recruited here after being at Emory University in pediatric emergency medicine to come down and be a pediatric ER doctor at All Children's Hospital, a hospital that many of you guys built, and I appreciate that. And it was a wonderful little place that was so amazing that Johns Hopkins decided that they wanted to merge with us and turn it into an academic center. And how lucky we are that the community stood behind this hospital and created a hospital like what we have here in St. Petersburg. And although it's been a little bit rough lately with some of the things you may have seen in the news, things are coming back up and are absolutely wonderful. And the providers there are very invigorated with the care that we can provide for children. So I came down here as a pediatric ER doctor, and I worked exclusively in the pediatric emergency center for 6 years. And then one day, one of my partners said to me, "Hey, they're thinking about starting a concussion clinic." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, and you should actually do it because you're really into concussion and sports. Maybe, are you thinking about that you might want to do that?" I said, "Yeah." So I met with hospital administration. And they said, "Yeah, let's start a clinic. Let's have it be about a half day a week. We'll maybe do it on Monday mornings, and you can work as an ER doctor, and the kids with concussion can come in and you can see them. And if it's not busy, you can go back and forth between the ER because I am a pediatric ER doctor." And I looked at the numbers and I looked at the data, and that was not going to happen. Okay, I knew that we were at a very interesting stage where there was going to be a lot more diagnosis and treatment of concussion. And we're going to talk about that tonight. Hopefully I can dispel some rumors about concussion, teach you a little bit more about concussion, and then last but not least, answer your questions about concussion. So I called this talk Concussion, the Unwanted Side Effects of Sports Participation, because we have an obesity epidemic in our country and we want children playing sports. And as parents, we have to gauge whether Sports are more important than concussion and injuries, or vice versa. I will give you guys a disclaimer. I have 3 children. I allow them to play contact sports. My daughter Julia played soccer growing up. My daughter Taylor plays soccer right now, and my son Connor is on a lacrosse field, but also plays tackle football. He's 8 years old. I'm his coach. So just so you know where I'm coming from. So concussion's not new. We've heard so much about concussion, but it is not a new thing, okay? Right now we're talking about concussion, but it's been around for a long time, and I think that potentially that one of the first places we may have learned about concussion is in this book called the Corpus Hippocraticum. It's a book of 60 early works that are attributed to Hippocrates from the 5th century BC. My daughter's actually learning about this in Mrs. Huss's class in 6th grade. In the Corpus Hippocraticum, Hippocrates talks about something called commotion of the brain that's caused by a blow where the victim loses his speech and cannot see. That sounds a lot like a concussion. So it sounds like in the 5th century BC, we knew that if you were hit in the head, you could have these symptoms that are similar to concussion. I don't know if it was this or if it was potentially in the early 900s, this book by Rhazes of Persia. The Persian people, they lived in major cities, but they also had these smaller cities. So Rhazes decided he was going to create that home journal of how to take care of your kids or how to take care of other people in your community. And he created this book. And in that medical manual where it described different things, it described a concussive type state that occurred in the absence of skull injury. So he talked about the fact that people would not have a fractured skull, would not have bruises, but they'd have problems with the way their brains thought. So we've known about this for a long time. But these aren't the first 2 times that concussion is written about. The first time concussion was ever written about, at least what I believe, is in our Bible. In the Old Testament, there's a story of David and Goliath. Have you guys heard this story? David was a small man standing at the riverbed. And then came Goliath. Goliath was huge, okay? He was the Philistine warrior. They said he was 4 cubits in a span. They described him as 7 foot 8 inches. And little David stepped forward and he killed him not with the stone, or not with the sword, but with the stone. How did he do it? He reached down into the river, he picked up that stone, he put it in a sling, and he threw it in the air, and it hit Goliath in the head, and Goliath fell down, and then he cut his head off. But before that, he hit him in the head, and he lost consciousness. So we knew, even in the Old Testament, that head injuries could cause neurologic problems, right? And it's there. So, most of us in the room have had a concussion. If I ask you guys, have you had a concussion? A few people will raise their hand. But the truth is that all of you have had a concussion, okay? Concussion is a normal thing that happens to kids. It does happen. But in today's day and age, it's perceived differently and it's seen differently, and I'll kind of teach you why. When we were young, it was called getting a ding or getting your bell rung, but it's made worse by today's technology. It's made worse by what we're doing in the classrooms. It's made worse by what we're doing on the television, on the computers, and with our phones. You've heard this rumor that when you get hit in the head, don't put a child to bed, right? You guys have all heard that, right? Why is that? Let's think about why is that? Why can't the kid go to bed? What happens when they fall asleep? Nothing. Nothing happens when you fall asleep after you've had a head injury, but the difference is this. If you were a young child and you had a big head injury, you fell out of a tree 100 years ago, and you're complaining, oh, Mom, I don't feel so well, they might put you to bed, but not check on you from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And the process that happens with a bleed inside your skull is that you have an initial bleed, a lot of times, an epidural bleed, and then slowly that bleed, this has nothing to do with concussion, by the way, slowly that bleed will grow and grow and grow, and you'll lose the ability to see, you'll have slurred speech, you'll lose the ability to talk, you'll lose the ability to interact, then you'll lose your respiratory drive, then you'll perish, okay? But that's a progression. So that's why in the emergency center, we watch children for 4 hours, and usually if they're fine by 4 hours and have no neurologic symptoms, we figured that they're going to be okay. But you watch for that progression. So that's why we don't put kids to sleep, because it's not about putting the child to sleep. It doesn't matter if they fall asleep. I've got moms driving down the highway with a child with a head injury trying to get to the ER, and they're turning backwards trying to smack the kid to keep him awake because they don't want him to fall asleep. It's not the fall asleep. It's the go to sleep and not be watched. So what can we learn from that? If a child has a head injury and they do go to sleep, let's say they have a head injury right before they're going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, and they go to bed, you have to go and wake them up. You don't have to get them up and have them do their multiplication tables or sing Yankee Doodle Dandy, but you have to just see that they're purposeful, okay? So I tell parents, look, it's okay if they fall asleep, but go in, tickle their nose, see that they locate their nose and push your hand away, or they wake up and cry, something like that, and then we know at least that they're purposeful. When I trained, we talked about concussion like this. We had grading systems. This is crazy because this is not what we do at all now. We had the Colorado, the American Academy of Neurology, and the Cantu grading system. I had the opportunity to lecture with Dr. Cantu, and I was kind of razzing him about it because he's still an expert on concussion. But all of his concussion grades that he had were based upon loss of consciousness. And today we don't even use loss of consciousness associated with concussion. Yes, you can have loss of consciousness, but that's not something we think about with regards to your prognosis. So we don't use this anymore. This does not exist, okay? A concussion is a concussion is a concussion. You don't have a mild concussion or moderate concussion or severe concussion. I cannot tell when somebody walks in my clinic whether they're going to have a 1-week turnaround or a 6-week turnaround. I just can't tell. There are some of them that are doing really well, and I'm like, yeah, probably it'll turn around pretty quick. The average kid, 85% of them are better in 7 to 10 days, meaning back to full school, full activity. But we just can't tell that, so grading concussions just doesn't work. What is a concussion? If an athlete, or anyone for that matter, gets hit in the head or body, okay, because you can get hit in the body and cause a concussion. How does that happen? If you get hit hard enough in the body, you have whiplash of your head or movement of your head, and that can cause movement of the brain. So a strike to the body could cause that. A car accident, most people that suffer concussions after car accident don't hit their head, but their whole body gets shaken enough that they have a concussion. I surmise that those soldiers that are in Iraq that we're now hearing that they have concussion symptoms. I can't imagine that they hit their heads. It was the power of the bomb that went off that gave them a shake, and then that caused the traumatic brain injury. But what do kids complain of? They complain of headache. They complain of dizziness. Trouble with noise or light. They'll have problems with the light. The light's just bothering them. Or loud music. They'll tell you to turn down the music in the car. Emotional ability. Trouble with memory, and then the term most of them use is foggy. What is emotional ability? How can I tell you guys about that? I had a middle linebacker at Indian Rocks Christian School at one point who, his other linebacker, outside linebacker, said, get him off the field. He's not acting right. He doesn't know the plays. He comes off the field and he's crying. And this guy's standing there in front of me. I don't know if I'm at him. And he's crying and said, I did the plays right. Everything's fine. And I looked at my fellow physician that was there, and I'm like, what's up with this kid? He's like, I don't know. Let's sit him out. We'll check him at halftime. So we check him out. We don't think he has a concussion, but we keep him out for the first half. Halftime, we bring him into the locker room. We check him out. He's still really emotional. Everything about him on exam is normal. He has 0 symptoms. We're walking out of the locker room with him. He has his helmet in his hand. His dad's like, Doc, come here. What are you doing with him? And what do you think's wrong with him? I'm like, well, we were worried about a concussion, but everything checks out fine. He's like, well, was he crying in the sidelines? I'm like, yeah. He's like, he didn't cry when our dog died last year. He doesn't cry. He had a concussion before. The only thing he did was cry. That's his symptom. Don't put him back in. Next morning, I saw the kid. Horrible headache, horrible dizziness. So knowing the athlete is more important. The idea is when in doubt, sit them out. If you know the kid, that's what, you need to know the kid. That's most important. If you have a concern and you think a child has a concussion, there will be another game, okay? They just need to come out, have them seen by somebody who's comfortable seeing them. When in doubt, sit them out. So why now? Why is there so much about concussion in literature? In the population that we have here, a lot of you appear to be a little bit older than me, so you can probably remember the way that American tackle football looked in the 70s. And if we look at before the helmet technology, if we look at the number of deaths, let's look at 65 to 74, okay? In that 10-year period, more than 160 athletes in the United States died associated with a head injury from playing tackle football in our country, okay? That's 16 a year. Why was that? Well, we didn't have as good a helmet technology. As the helmet technology got better, people could absorb bigger and bigger blows, and they weren't having skull fractures and bleeds and dying, okay, because that's what was causing it. It was caused by bleeds in the brain from skull fractures. Now they were having these big hits, and they weren't fracturing their skull, they weren't bleeding, they weren't dying, but they were ending up with likely concussion. We watched that number decrease, and in the most recent CDC morbidity mortality data, 22 head injury-related deaths in the 10-year period between 2005 and 2014. That number has gone down considerably, considering that it was 16 a year from 65 to 75, and now it's 2 a year, essentially. 18% of those patients had concussion within 4 weeks of the death. So we're all very worried about this second hit that can happen, okay, after a concussion. The most important thing with regards to concussion is holding them out. But that's a shocking number, isn't it? So 82% of kids who died from head injury on the field, that we think died from head injury on the field of playing a sport, didn't have a history of a concussion. So what was that? Well, in those people, it may have been a neck injury that led to it, or it may have been an instant bleed or something ruptured in their brain. Could have happened with anything, but did happen in tackle football, and that is a risk. There's been an explosion of concussion research in the last 20 years. I mean, every day there's another 5 to 10 articles, and we're learning more and more. And if I ever come back and speak with you in 10 years, just remember that this guy here today knows nothing about concussion, because what I know now compared to what I knew 7 years ago is amazing. Just how much more we're learning. We still really don't understand it. One of the areas that we'll talk about later is CTE, but let's talk about this. Let's look at the timeline a little bit more. 2007, NFL finally institutes a concussion guideline that required a patient to be asymptomatic, okay, prior to return to play. And if you lost consciousness, you couldn't play anymore. What does that mean? That means in 2006, you could lose consciousness in an NFL football game and then go back and play in the same game. In 2006. So we knew something was going on. It's good that these rules have changed, but if we consider that, that's really interesting. You know, football was a different game back in the early 1900s, and the forward pass became part of football because of President Theodore Roosevelt. What happened was his son Teddy Roosevelt was playing in college, and he suffered a really big hit and a facial injury. And in that facial injury, his mother, okay, Eleanor Roosevelt, said to her husband, the President of the United States, "You need to get involved in this." And sure enough, he did get involved, and he said they had to change the rules of college football. And that's when they instituted the forward pass. It was by a presidential edict, essentially, that changed. So why concussion changes? One of the biggest reasons why concussion rules changed in the United States was because of the Zach Lidstedt law. Zach was a 13-year-old two-way junior high school player. And in the first quarter of a game, he suffered a really bad head injury. It took a big hit, holding his head in pain. We have it on video. He's holding his head in pain. He doesn't feel well. Halftime, he did not feel very well at all, but they put him back in the second half. He shook it off, okay? He got his bell rung or had a ding, and he shook it off. These are things we don't do anymore. And he went back in the second half. He had a great second half. It was actually the best second half he's had. But when Zach went into the end zone after the game celebrating, he fell down. He had suffered diffuse cerebral edema and suffered lifelong consequences from that. His injury left him with a permanent disability. That's him at the Seattle Seahawks game. His parents were wonderful people and very well connected, and they pushed for legislation in Washington State. And in 2009, the governor enacted the Zach Lidstedt law. So that's just 11 years ago now, that there was a concussion law in the United States that said that if an athlete is suspected of having a concussion, they need to sit out for the rest of the game. That's in 2009. In 2012, our state finally got up to speed. We were in the 30s of the states in the United States to do this. And we put Florida House Bill 291 through. Mississippi finally signed the law in 2014. It was actually a week from this Friday. It was the Friday before Super Bowl Sunday that they got it done. All 50 states now have return to play criteria associated with concussion. If you get one of these concussions, you cannot return to play, and you have to do a stepwise approach to get back to play. Many have return to learning laws as well. We don't have that here in Florida. We allow the school districts to create those. So when I first started this, I created return to learning forms for Pinellas County, Sarasota County, Manatee County. Hillsborough County still doesn't have one. It's very political in the county school districts. It really is. And we created these forms so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel, telling teachers, look, this is a concussion. These are the symptoms the patient's having. Please decrease homework by X number of %. Don't let them take tests. These different things that we'll do. But we do try to return kids back to school early, because we're finding that the longer kids stay away, the more depressed they get, the more symptoms they report. There was a recent study in pediatrics, the Journal of Pediatrics, that said that kids who were checked on every hour, who were left in a dark room and checked on every hour, had more symptoms than kids, if they were kept in a dark room for 72 hours, had more symptoms than those kids that were allowed to do things around their house. Well, why is that? If I stand in front of you and every hour I walk up and say, does your finger hurt? And then I come back an hour later and say, does your finger hurt? You're going to start telling me your finger hurts, okay? Because you have nothing else to think about. For the next hour, you're sitting in a dark room. So we really think that for kids with concussion, we need to start letting them do things that aren't a risk to them and aren't going to make their symptoms better at a quicker time. And I'll talk to that a little bit more in a second. So what is a concussion? We call this a mild traumatic brain injury, mild TBI. It's a pathophysiologic and metabolic change that occurs in the brain. We show this picture. Look at this picture. You can see it's obvious that the guy's got a concussion. He gets hit in the head, and then that red stuff happens, and on the other side, the red stuff happens. Well, the truth is in concussion, there's no red stuff. You can't see a concussion on MRI or CT scan. You can't see a concussion on any type of imaging right now. We do have some research imaging that we can kind of pick up subtleties, but you really can't get imaging. So when we're CT scanning a patient in the emergency center or getting an MRI, we're looking for a bleed. We're looking for mass effect. We're not looking for concussion. I can do nothing with that for concussion. No gross anatomic damage occurs. CT scan and MRI does not help. Diagnosis is difficult. Less than 5% of concussions are associated with loss of consciousness in the literature. I believe in my patient population, it's significantly less. I hardly ever see somebody that loses consciousness. Hardly ever. But if you have lost consciousness, you have a concussion. Because a concussion is a hit to the body or brain that causes altered mental status, right? Okay, so let's talk about this sport called boxing. What are we doing? We're getting in a ring and we're punching each other with our fists in order to slow the other athlete down and potentially concuss them to the point where you can knock them out or knock them down so that they can't get back up. So anybody who's had a knockout in boxing has a concussion. Concussions happen from a hit, or knowing the player is more important. I talked to you that. And patients are going to have symptoms immediately. So when it happens, within 5 minutes, they're going to tell you, I have headache, I have problems with my vision, I have these other things. The symptoms happen immediately. This is a breakdown of what the symptoms are. Headache, obviously, most common. Dizziness is another common thing. Some will complain of blurred or trouble with their blurred or double vision as well. What can we do about it? Okay, this is a picture that was given me by a friend named Alan DeVito who works at the hospital. It's showing that somebody was showing off how great the new leather helmets are. Don't suspect that you should do this. Specialized helmets, mouth guards, and headbands do not decrease concussion. Helmets, certain helmets do not decrease concussion. I do not have a study that shows this, and it's ridiculous because you've got this Virginia Tech studies that are all coming out that are saying, hey, these helmets are much better. This helmet's better than this helmet, better than this helmet. They're dropping the helmets off of ladders or heights and checking to see how much energy they dissipate. So one of the schools I happen to work at has the best helmets in the world. The kids hate them because the way they made them decrease concussion or not even decrease concussion, I never said that. Decrease the energy associated with a fall is by making them heavier. So now the kids are wearing heavier and heavier helmets to try and beat these tests that are happening at Virginia Tech, but yet they've never done a study where they take two helmets, they put one on the AFC and the other on the NFC, and then halfway through the season they switch sides of the league with the two helmets, okay, double-blinded trial, okay, and see who had the most concussions. Why haven't we done that? I don't know, but we have no data. There is some data out of Pittsburgh that they looked at two different school districts. One was a poor and one was a rich school district. The poor school district had the same incidence of concussion as the rich school district. The poor school district had helmets that were 15 to 20 years old. The rich district had the brand new helmets. So when Connor plays, he plays in a good, well-fitting helmet, but I can afford a $700 helmet. I don't buy one for him. I teach him how to tackle appropriately. I just don't feel that it's necessary to have. It's good to have a good fitting helmet. It's got to be in good shape, but there's never been a study that one helmet's better than the other. Most concussions happen secondary to rotational forces. So if you look at the NFL, concussions happen from getting hit in the ear hole, okay? Or getting hit from the side. When we take a hit like this, our body's not ready for it. In Taekwondo, the hook kick is the kick that has more concussion. You get hit here. If you ever watch a boxing match and the guy's going to get knocked out, they usually throw a cross. They usually hit him right here over the vestibular system. I lost power. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Good. All right, we're recording. Okay. I'm going too fast. This is how I go. Yeah, this is my speed. This is my speed. This is actually slow. So in Taekwondo, the hook kick's what causes it most often, so it's getting hit in the side of the head. Why is that? Why are these hits to the side of the head and side of the body what causes it? Well, as humans, look at us. We have our eyes in the front of our head, right? So you think about fight or flight, right? We've all heard about fight or flight. So if you're going to fight or flight, you're either going to look right at what you're going to go after, or you're going to run straight away from it. You don't run a fly pattern when somebody's coming up at the side of your head. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, look at it in nature. Wow, that's loud. Look at the female lion chasing this animal here. The animal's not running a zigzag pattern to get away from it. So for us humans, we're made to be hit in the front of our head or the back of our head. Our muscles are made to dissipate this kind of energy. We're not made to dissipate this kind of energy. It just doesn't work. So that's where a lot of these hits happen. They happen from the ear hole or from the side of the body. Supplementations with vitamins and minerals do not help. What happens in a concussion? Let's go through it. You get hit in the head, okay? Blood flow to the brain decreases by 20% for the first 2 days, okay? But at least for the first hour, blood flow's dropped off. When that blood flow drops off, sodium rushes out of cells and potassium rushes into cells. So sodium rushes into that extracellular space, potassium rushes inside. And the potassium makes its way into the mitochondria, which are the energy-producing parts of the cell. So all the cells are shut down, okay? In order to get that sodium back in and the potassium back out, we have to run these things on the cells called transporters, okay? They require energy. But if you're decreasing the blood flow to your brain by 20%, you're not getting the energy made in your liver because your brain doesn't make its own energy. So what happens? The body goes into something called anaerobic glycolysis. What does anaerobic mean? It means without oxygen. What happens when you work out without oxygen? The muscles fatigue, they kind of hurt, right? So if all of us did about 150 squats right now, we all did 150 squats or 150 push-ups right now, okay? And then, or let's do squats. We do 150 squats right now. After a while, you're going to start burning because you're going to start building up lactic acid. The same thing is going to happen. I just broke this thing. The same thing is going to happen when we do squats or when our brain has decreased oxygen or decreased energy. So then when does the brain hurt? Well, let's do those squats. Let's do them for 150 of them. And in 2 days, let's go sit in the classroom. You feel perfectly fine when you're sitting there in the classroom, don't you? But when I ask you to get out of the chair or walk the stairs, ooh, man, that hurts, okay? Same thing with concussion. Eventually, you get to a steady state in the brain where you feel okay. But then, when we ask you to think, or we ask you to play, or we ask you to run, and we ask for more energy to be used by that brain, that's when you start to feel sick. So that's that second phase. Kids will be in horrible pain for a day or two, and then they'll start waking up in the morning and feeling well, but then when we ask them to do something, like in the classroom with that cognitive output, boom, headache comes on. We ask them to play a sport, blood goes to the muscles, boom, headache comes on. So what's the number one way to decrease concussions? The number one way to decrease concussions is obviously limiting exposure, but do we really want to do that? Do we want to stop kids from playing sports? Every family has their own choice of whether a sport is good for them or bad. I will tell you that my son playing football, going to this school and playing football with the kids that he plays football with, he gets a completely different group of kids that he is around, different walk of life, teamwork. He loves the sport, and it's good for my family, but for many families it's not. Should we limit exposure? Well, think about some of the rules we've created, right? We're decreasing tackling in practices. We're changing the way we tackle in the game. In California, there was a lawsuit that said that kids shouldn't be heading the soccer ball. We should just not head the soccer ball. Well, 20% of professional soccer goals are scored with the head, okay? And I personally have not seen very many concussions because of heading a soccer ball. What I do see is I see concussions associated with going up for a 50-50 ball with your head and getting elbowed by somebody else, getting your legs taken out from you, and falling and hitting the ground. But the data says 30% of concussions are caused by heading the ball. Well, yes, I guess you're in the act of heading, but it's not actually hitting the ball with your head. So we're still going to go up for the 50-50 balls. We're just going to be trying to get them with something else on our body. So we ended up, because of that lawsuit, U.S. Soccer said no heading under the age of 12. So if you guys need to get used to not making the World Cup because we're going to miss out on 20% of our goals. And then the question becomes well, if the kids aren't heading when they're 10 or 11, and then we start heading them at 12 when the kids are bigger, stronger, faster, and the ball's coming harder, how's that going to help? Well, what do I tell kids in soccer? I tell them not to head long balls, okay? What does that mean? Well, when they punt the ball or when they kick a goal kick and it's coming from halfway across the field, if you guys ever watch football, the guy that catches the punt, he does this, right? He's going to fair catch, he does this, and then he moves around because the air is moving the ball, and he's got to catch it, right? Everyone's seen that. But now we have kids that are standing back past the halfway line trying to head a ball and land it right here. So the concussions I have seen from heading the ball are associated with kids that are heading long balls because it misses by a little bit. All their muscles are flexed to take the ball off of here and it hits the side, and then they end up with that rotational movement. That's really what it's at. When you watch a good header, and you watch those headers that score goals inside the 18-yard box, is the kid really taking, as a player, really taking the energy away from the ball? No, they're flicking it on. They're taking the energy and redirecting it. That's a good header, right? but not this, where it's hitting you in the front of the head. So I just taught you two things. I said, one, we're made to take energy like this, but you got to know where it's coming from. So hitting long balls is a bad idea. It's the same thing with football and sports like that. We shouldn't be hitting with our head, okay? We need to be wrapping up and doing that. What other sports have I seen concussion from? Guys ready? Barrel racing, swimming, 3 swimmers, divers, golf. I've seen a kid hit a ball off of a tree and it comes back and hit him. I've seen a kid walking across the tee box and get hit with the golf club. Tennis, hit with the racket. Cheerleading is one of the worst. Great example. Why is cheerleading so bad? Has anybody seen what cheerleading looks like these days? Competition cheerleading? It is a mix between circus arts and the cheerleading we all know. These kids are spinning, moving, dancing, and the reason why cheerleading is the worst is because when you look at these routines, you got 20 kids going in 20 different directions, and if one of them is missing, it doesn't work. So my biggest liars are my cheerleaders, because they'll say they're fine, because they've got to get back to competition, because they're letting their team down. There's no stand-in. There's always a backup quarterback or a backup linebacker. There's not a backup cheerleader. So you have a concussion, what do you do? Well, most concussions resolve on their own, okay? So basically what I'm doing is helping the family, one, make sure that there's not something else going on. I have found kids that have brain bleeds that come in. I have found kids that have other medical problems. We had a kid this summer who fell on the pool deck and was having concussion-like symptoms. And we saw him once and we went through the full exam, everything looked okay, and we went through concussion precautions and he came back and his headaches were worse. And he's young, and he just didn't fit the criteria. And I said, you know what, we need to get an MRI on this kid. And sure enough, we found that he had a mass in his brain. Because some of that stuff, so that's my job to sift through that, because I've seen 6,000, 7,000 concussions in the last 7 years. I've found 2 or 3 kids that have problems that needed an MRI. Most of the kids, I don't expose them to radiation with CT scan, and I don't have to get an MRI. But they resolve on their own in most cases. I told you 85% of kids resolve in 7 to 10 days. We need to limit exposure to the things that make concussion worse. Okay, let's learn this part. With our eyes, we have 5 reflexes, 5 or 6, depending upon what you read. And these reflexes are amazing, okay? They allow me to decide that I'm going to look at a lion here walking at me and a lion here walking at me, and I can instantly bounce my eyes back and forth between these 2 lions, and as they're walking towards me, I can determine what angle they're coming at, what speed they're coming at, and the reflex allows my eyes to bounce back and forth and follow them all the way to me, calculating that all the way. One of the problems that we see in concussion is this thing called vestibular abnormality. What is the vestibular system? It lives behind our ears. It's one of the most important systems. It's the one we protect the most, honestly. Come on, we put it right here to protect it. If you don't have a vestibular system, you are going to die. It doesn't matter how much the village wants you to live. It doesn't matter how much the community wants you to live. You're not going to make it. Because people without a vestibular system are so dizzy that they vomit constantly, so you wouldn't be able to stay hydrated. We hide it back here. This is that system. It's 3 semicircular canals. It's the system that allows, I've never done this, but if you throw a cat in the air apparently and make it flip, it's going to land on its feet. It's a system that allows us to do a backflip off a diving board and know when to pull out our legs because we know where we are in this earth. So the vestibular system gets messed up with concussion. Okay? An example of how that happens. Has anybody been on a cruise before? Cruises are great, right? But the day you get off the cruise, you're coming off the cruise, everything's great, you got your bags packed, you got your big Mexican sombrero on, you're walking off the cruise, and you feel fine. But the next day, for some reason, you're talking to somebody, and you're like, whoa, dude, what is going on here? You got to hold on to something because you're moving. Your vestibular system, the amazing thing behind your ear, has reset to the ocean. It is completely reset to the waves of the ocean. And when you're standing there and you feel that, your body is used to rocking, and this thing reset to accept that rocking as normal. So when you get back on land and it's flat, it's looking for its normal. Sea legs. What happens in concussion is your vestibular system gets thrown off and your vestibular ocular system gets thrown off, so the eyes don't move like they're supposed to. So one of the tests that I do in concussion is I look at a kid's horizontal gaze, so I have them follow me. It's a field sobriety test, right? And the eyes jump as you go back and forth. When I do that reflex, we call it saccades, I watch them. They'll start here. Let's say that this is an 80-degree arc. They'll start here. They'll shoot to about 70 degrees and then correct to 80 degrees. Well, I'll do that too if you do it to me, but I'm only going to do it once. Because once I do it the first time, I have now figured out that that's 80, okay? And I just bounce, 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 bounce. They will miss every single time because their vestibular system will tell them that they're going 80 when they're really going 70. Well, how does that get altered? Okay, now I'm going to do a charade for you. Have you guys ever seen a kid do this? What is that? What app is that? Does anybody know? You guys know what app that is? That is called Snapchat, okay? And when you're looking for things on Snapchat, okay, you're flipping through, looking for what you want to look at, and your fingers moving so fast and your eyes are moving so fast that you miss it. Watch them. They miss it, and then they come back to what they wanted to see. So their eyes are going, and stopping and coming back. Well, that movement's off when you have a concussion, okay? So that movement's off, so the eyes are jumping like this. Same thing happens in the classroom. Sitting in the classroom, a lot of schools are using smart boards now, okay? So the kid's on a computer here, and there's a computer up there. So they're bouncing back and forth, but they're missing every time. So they're bouncing, correcting, bouncing, correcting, bouncing, correcting. And that throws them off. Watching television, huge problem. As the pixel rate change and the things move on the TVs, the eyes are bouncing back and forth. Noise is bothering you as well. So our technology is causing concussion symptoms to show up worse because we didn't have this. When we sat in class, we did what you guys are doing. You're watching me speak, I'm speaking to you, and every once in a while you might have looked down and taken a note. Nowadays, watching kids in classroom, a lot of them, it's like watching them watch a tennis match. They're literally bouncing up and down. There's this other concept that a lot of schools have gone to, ours hasn't in most classes, is they seat the children at tables because they want them to learn to work together. The problem is half the kids, when they're watching a lecture, are watching it out of the corner of their eyes or having to lean back and look across somebody. By having your eyes in that position, my kids with concussion end up with worse symptoms. So I change where they're sitting in the classroom so that they have a straight shot, at least with their eyes. After a little while, I tell them they can watch TV, but they can't watch TV like this and flip the screen because it's amazing, isn't it? We can watch TV like this and it feels totally comfortable. I tell them they can't look like this either. They have to look straight at the television so that their eyes aren't having to make these adjustments. At least I'm trying to benefit them. So eye movement and vestibular abnormality is a huge part of concussion. Concentrate on the student athlete. You want to return to learning slowly, okay? We offer accommodations in the schools, okay? So we have to make it more bearable, okay? So sometimes kids will have to wear sunglasses in class, very rare. Sometimes kids will wear hats or sunglasses to keep the light out of their eyes. I ask that the children have an unobstructed view to the teacher so that they're not looking out of the corner of their eye. I ask that they have their notes printed out ahead of them because the computers will throw off your eyes as well. We all know that if we look at a computer for a long time, especially at night, our eyes get fatigued. So we try and have them look at paper. I give them makeup work in a planned progression. I don't have them take any tests because their brains are not functioning well. So these kids will come in. We have computerized testing where we ask them to remember things and things like that. Look at shapes, look at words, and remember these things, give them back. And it's amazing how kids that are talking to you and seem completely normal have horrible cognitive output. And then you test them later when they're resolving from the concussion, and you watch it resolve. But definitely don't want to take tests until you're fully cleared. When are they going to return back to sport? Once they've gotten back to full school with no symptoms. And then in our state, we have a 5-day return to play protocol. First day you jog. Second day you do a little ball sport, you do a little ball touches and jogging. Third day you scrimmage, but it can be non-contact. Fourth day you do a full contact practice, and then you can go back to play. This is the return to play protocol across our country. Very interesting, isn't it? It's 5 days. Why did we choose 5 days? What data do we have? Oh, we don't have any data. But if you're in Texas, let's say Texas, and you suffer a concussion on a Friday night, let's say, and you get to your doctor on Monday morning, you say, Doc, I'm fine, I can go back and play. Day 1, Monday. Day 2, Tuesday. Day 3, Wednesday. Day 4, Thursday. You're back ready to play on Friday. So some of this is still driven by return to sport, okay? That you're back to be able to be on that field. So I'm talking about the Friday night lights that occur all fall long in football. We don't have great data, but this is some way to slow the kids down, to get them back, to make sure that as we push them, that they're not going to have symptoms and we're not going to pick up on anything. A lot of our schools locally have athletic trainers at the school. An athletic trainer is somebody who has graduated from college with an athletic training degree. Now, in the next 5 years, they'll all have master's degrees as well. These are medical professionals that work at the school, so they administer the return to play protocol. They're the ones that are at the sidelines diagnosing these things. If you have any children or grandchildren that are hurt at their school locally, their high school, tell them to go see the athletic trainer. Did you see the athletic trainer? A lot of them will say no, but that's a medical professional that can help make a diagnosis for them. How many is too many? We don't know. Back when I started this, it was 3. If you've had 3 concussions, you should stop all sport. But nowadays, I'm getting kids that are coming in at 9 and 10 years old, and the moms are like, yeah, he's had 4 concussions. And I'm like, oh, he has? Has he seen a doctor for him? Well, no, but I know he had one when he was 2, when he was 6, blah, blah, blah. Young children don't have concussion very often. If they do, they resolve almost immediately. Children under the age of 10, I would tell you that if we see, in a year, we probably see 700, 800 new concussions. Kids under the age of 10 represent maybe a dozen of those. But if you watch the playground here at LCC, those are the kids that are just banging their heads. They're falling off of stuff, landing on the ground. I don't know why they resolve so quickly. There's got to be something with the neuroplasticity. And if they do get a concussion, like in the ER, the doctor's like, I absolutely believe they have a concussion. By the time they come to see me, perfectly fine. No symptoms. But those kids in high school show more symptoms than the kids in college and then older people as well. I hold kids out if they have a second concussion in a season. So if they're in a season, okay, and you had a concussion at the beginning of the season and then you get another one during that season, you're out for that season and then a couple months afterwards, okay? I let their brain heal, for sure. If you have 3 in a year, I'm keeping you out for at least 6 months, but we're going to have a long conversation because you've just missed that entire year. There's no lifetime maximum, but I look for patterns of injury. So if you have a concussion and you're not one of those kids that resolve in 7 to 10 days, you're a kid that resolves in like 2 months, and then you have a second concussion that year and it takes 2 months, we're going to have a conversation about the fact that you just lost 4 months of your year. And is this sport worth it? Everybody's got a different threshold for concussion. How much time do I have left? Have you guys heard of a guy named Sid Crosby? Has anybody ever heard of Sid Crosby? He's a hockey player. Sid Crosby was the MVP of the National Hockey League when he got a concussion that lasted 50 weeks, 50 weeks. How did that happen? To the MVP of the league, how did it happen? I can tell you how it happened. On January 1st, they have a game called the Winter Classic. It's the outdoor game. You guys have seen this game. It's an outdoor game that they play in hockey, and he got throttled in the second period, got knocked off his feet, head hit the wall, and he kind of skated off gingerly. Didn't come back in the rest of the game. Said he was fine. I'm perfectly fine. He had a history of concussions. People knew he'd had concussions, but he said he was fine. 3 days later, he's playing against the Lightning here in Tampa Bay, and Victor Hedman apparently hit him, but on video it looks like nothing. And Sid Crosby was then out for 50 weeks. Why was he out for 50 weeks? Because he was playing with concussion. It's the second hit that causes the worst problems. And that's where we're going right now. That's what we're trying to do with Safe Play, is getting kids to report their concussions so that they don't have that second hit. Fun and safe play should be our number one priority. We want kids to grow up and throw interceptions for the Bucks. No, we don't. We want Jameis to just be a happy kid. Thank you very much. Any questions, guys? Ma'am, sorry. I do see many gymnasts. I actually had the opportunity last year to be the team physician for the U.S. National team, and it's amazing how many of our girls that are going to the Olympics are injured. It's a crazy sport. Gymnasts are injured quite often. I do see some concussions in gymnastics, not terribly often. But when a gymnast does have a concussion, it's a huge problem because that vestibular system's off. The athletes that really have had problems with, that barrel racer girl that I told you about, my gymnasts and my swimmers, anybody who flips or tumbles in their sport, they're going to have a really hard time getting back to the sport. Because even though we're returning the players when they have completely normal balance and completely normal eye movement, there may still be some slight variability in their vestibular system that causes them to still have problems. We've seen in an NCAA study that in the 6 months after you have a concussion, you're more likely to have a serious lower extremity injury. So something's going on with their balance. We just don't know what that is. But yes, I've absolutely seen concussions in gymnasts. I've also seen Simone Biles land this far for me after doing a double back full, and that woman is a freak. There is no one that can jump as high as that. She is, and she's going to win it all this year too, which is going to be cool to watch. Sir, did you have a question? Anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am.
There you go.
Down the road, what are the statistics of problems?
So, if anybody's seen the movie Concussion, we talk about a doctor named Bennett Amalu. None of us in the concussion world respect him anymore. He gives out data that's not real. He says he diagnosed a condition called CTE. I told you I was going to talk about this, and I guess I just didn't put the slides in. He talks about a condition called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And if you look at the news, you'll believe that everyone in the NFL is going to have CTE, and my son is too. And the truth is, it's not. It's just not the truth. CTE is an entity that has occurred, and we know we can find it post-mortem in some NFL players, 5 to 8%. We have no idea why. We don't know what the causes of this are. We do know that there are other alternative causes, and it's really hard to study, and I don't want to get super into statistics, but first thing is that NFL players are different than their peers. We don't have a matched peer group to compare them to. They're the best, strongest athletes in our country, and they're people that aren't dying of other conditions that their peers may die of before they get to the age of 40 or 50. These are people that just fall outside their own peer group. They don't end up with a high episode or a high rate of diabetes. They don't end up with high blood pressure, things like that, because many of them, because they played sports at a super high level. They're just healthier. So with age match controls, it just doesn't work. You can only compare these guys to themselves. Is there something going on with them? Absolutely. Does it have to do with the fact that they were going back and playing with concussion? Brett Favre will tell you that he forgets full seasons. He went to a soccer field with his wife, and he said, wow, this facility is unbelievable. Kept talking about it. She's like, Brett, what are you talking about? And this is anecdotal. I've heard this story said. I haven't read it. She said, what are you talking about? And he said, this field complex. She said, you were here all last season with our daughter. He said, are you sure? I don't remember being here. Like, so some of these guys were playing with concussion over and over. The risk of opiate abuse in the 60s and 70s in NFL was much higher than 50%. So it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy, something's going on there. But it's not as bad as they make it seem. And I really believe that the way we're returning kids to play now, that they're at their baseline, is a good thing. There's data out there that says that in many groups, that the rates of neurologic abnormalities when you compare football players to kids in the band are identical across high school athletes in multiple longitudinal studies. So yes, there are definitely, I did not say that you can't have neurologic problems from playing sports, but I do not believe that an entire generation is going to come up and has that problems because your generation would have those problems. Many of us played contact sports in a much different age than we're playing them now and returned to play with concussion. So do I want Connor to play in the NFL? Heck no. Okay, that is a violent game. I'm going to watch on Sunday, but it is a violent game. I don't believe that playing in high school and grade school infers any risk to a kid other than the risks that happen on the field at that time. That's what I believe now. I may be wrong. I hope I'm not. So will soccer heading ever come back? No, because it became a legal problem now. So the little kids aren't allowed to head, and it's crazy. Dr. Breyer and I have daughters that play together, and to watch our children try and avoid a header at the age of 11, they're almost hurting themselves. Like to watch my daughter go up and a ball is right there for her to head, and then she throws herself backwards so she can try and catch it on her chest. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, but you know, the data said 30%, and there we go. We just run with it because there was a lawsuit, you know, and that's where we're at. But I'm not afraid of heading. I am afraid of heading long balls, and I've told both of your granddaughters not to head long balls. Sir? There's no known damage. There's no damage that we know of. We know that there are electrolyte abnormalities, so that the brain gets overworked. We cannot truly identify microscopic abnormalities. There is one type of study called diffusion tensor imaging, which is done in MRI. And diffusion tensor imaging looks at the flow of water through individual neurons and maps that somehow. I mean, we're making a picture with a magnet and then we're applying math to it, but essentially we're looking at the flow of water. And we can find that in concussed individuals, somewhere between 4 and 6% of those axons are not moving water the way they're supposed to. So there's got to be some microstructural abnormality going on there, but it seems to resolve when the patient's concussion resolves. So no, you cannot see concussion on anything. And is there something that it's just not there? And we're never going to be able to do diffusion tensor imaging on kids on the sidelines. So what the hope is that we can develop biomarkers. Something that's very interesting about Johns Hopkins. We have in that new research building, has anybody seen that? New research building is amazing. On one of the floors in there, we have a biorepository. And when kids check into the hospital, we ask the parents to sign a piece of paper that says, if we randomize your kid and blind everything, can we keep their extra serum and store it? And that's what we've been doing for years now. So there's this huge freezer, like half the size of this room. And all of that serum goes in there, and it has data about what the medical condition they have is. So that we can do a study that, let's say that we find out that this marker, MTB432, is the marker for appendicitis. They've figured it out at CHOP, and they say it's great. We can literally go pull 1,000 samples out of that freezer immediately, freezer will create individual aliquots. We can pull out 1,000 and run that study right there to see if that MDB, whatever, is the biomarker. What are biomarkers? They're small, we look for things like proteins or enzymes in the body that indicate disease states. And the hope is that we can use these biomarkers, signs of neuronal injury, to basically rapidly say that somebody's had a concussion. There's some studies out of Sweden that say that the height of one of them, neuron-specific enolase, will tell you how long you're going to be concussed for. We're not there yet, and it's going to be really expensive. But that's probably going to be what we see in the NFL maybe in 15 years. A guy pulls him to the tent, pulls out like a glucometer, checks him. They run the assay over 10 minutes, and they know what his number is. That's the hope. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Do we go straight to the pediatrician and they refer us to the concussion clinic, or
So
how does
how does that work with the family? So if a child's lost consciousness, or a child's getting progressively worse, child's intractably vomiting, or has some sign of head injury on their head, they should go to the ER. If they have a seizure, intractable vomiting, they're getting worse, or signs of an injury on their head, they need to go to the ER. If not, and they're doing okay and they have a headache and they're like, I got a slight headache, that's a child you can probably watch, okay? And then you take them to their pediatrician, and they would refer you to a sports medicine specialist. That's how that would work. A lot of families go to the emergency room and the doctor says, yep, they have a concussion, but we're trying not to image children anymore because we don't want to expose them to the radiation of a CT scan. So they look at them and make sure that they don't have signs of a bleed, which are some of those things I told you about, and then they send them to follow up with us. Yeah. But if you think your child has a concussion, I don't care if the coach doesn't think they have a concussion, pull them out. They do not go back to play, because that's the biggest risk, is having that second injury on top of where you are. I've had to retire 6 kids. And of the 6 kids I've had to retire from sport, all but one of them were kids that had multiple concussions without telling anyone about it. So I had a kid that came in at the end of football season. He had a concussion on Friday night. He felt horrible Saturday, Sunday, Monday. He started to get better Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He went back in the game Friday, felt horrible again, and he did this game after game after game. And then he got so bad that, he couldn't even bag at Publix when he got to me. He's doing a lot better now. But so it's those repeated hits, not the one. I'm a medical director of the sports medicine program at Johns Hopkins. I've had 3 concussions. I'm doing okay. I'm going to be fine. And it's going to be okay. I think I've had 3. No one diagnosed them. But I think I've had 3. Or maybe that's why I talk so fast. Ma'am. Yep, so I don't take care of elderly patients. I take care of only children under the age of 21. But concussion is on the rise, and the diagnosis of concussion is on the rise across the board. Concussions are happening in adults as well, absolutely. Now, the difference between adults and kids is in adults, our brains are shrinking. Okay, I had this conversation with a mom today. Our brains are getting smaller. The actual volume of our brain, not our knowledge, but our volumes are getting smaller. So we have more space between our skull and our brain. So an adult or even an elderly person like that's 80, they can fall and tear a bridging vein and then bleed easily. Don't tell any kid, at least an LCC kid, this, but their brains are a lot bigger than ours, and they fill their skulls. They absolutely fill their skulls. So in order for them to have a bleed, either they have to have massive trauma, like be shaken, or they have to have a skull fracture that then opens up, tears the dirt, etc. It's not as common in adults that they have a bleed that's not associated with a skull fracture. And then what are the symptoms of that? Those things I said. The other thing that's different, that there's a gift about concussion is this. Kids with concussion tend to wake up in the morning after a couple days and feel good, and then as they use their brain, they feel worse. Kids that have a bleed or a mass in their brain wake up in the morning with the worst headache in their life, they feel pukey, and then they get better throughout the day. It's exactly opposite. Yeah. Any other questions? What a cool program. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to